And we welcome you into the Spotlight. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Drew Brent, and if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668, or you can cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. Don't forget, if you can't get enough of the Spotlight, you can always catch us on KARV Radio Friday mornings at 7:30. That's 93.1 FM and AM 610. Friday mornings at 7:30. The Spotlight powered by Alethis Realty. Our guests today, I am so excited to have. I've been wanting these two men on this show since we've started, and I cannot tell you how excited I am. One is the author of The Brothers Four. This is Jock Davis, World War II veteran. The Brothers Four, Reliving the Great Depression and World War II. It is a story of Mr. Davis and his three brothers serving in World War II. Our other guest is Mr. Len Cotton. You have heard his name. You have seen him around. His career in public service lasts decades, and you might recognize that last name as well. He is the father of our Senator Tom Cotton. Gentlemen, how are you this afternoon?
Wonderful.
We are great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us, for coming here, Mr. Davis. I want to start with you. You, of course, have authored this book, The Brothers Four, and I want to show this to the camera so everybody can see. It's available on Amazon right now, so please order this book. It is the story of you and your three brothers and your service in World War II. First of all, talk to me a little bit about the book. What was the inspiration behind it, and why did you find it so important to tell this story?
Well, the memories of the love in the family back in World War II, because of the Depression and hard times, the big thing was to be able to love each other, which we had a lot of love. And I still love my brothers. They're all deceased. They all have wonderful records in the military, and they all survived. And it's just, it was a blessing for me to sit down and just renew that. You know, when you're writing a book, you keep a pad by your bed at night, and you wake up and you think of something that happened in our early life. Like we didn't have anything to do, so a guy gave us a billy goat, and we went to a dump where junk was, and we got enough wheels and stuff to put it together for that goat to pull that. Called him Billy. But that was just one of the few things we did, but it's derived from love. I'd say that 100%.
You know, when you talk to military service veterans, the families are always impacted, the people who are left at home. I can't imagine what it was like for your mother, for all four of her boys to be overseas. Where did each one of you serve, and how did your mother cope with that?
I'm glad you said that. When I arrived back home, and I stepped on the porch, my mother just screamed. And she said, "You boys don't know how many wet pillows I had during the night, and afraid that there'd be a gentleman step up on the front porch and say, 'I'm here to inform you.'" And she said, "I just praise God that you all came back safely." And it was just rough back in those days. My dad was a World War I veteran. He was wounded in France, and he died at the young age of 33. But he knew that my two older brothers had joined, and then I couldn't wait to get in, which I wasn't very happy after I got in. I saw what it was all about, but so much love. I wrote that book because I love my brothers and my family.
Where did each of you serve?
I served in South Pacific, in New Guinea, and the Philippines.
Now, for some of our younger viewers who may not be familiar with just how intense that particular theater was, kind of walk us through. What was the South Pacific?
I wish that I'd paid more attention. I'd have put more in about New Guinea, because I could write a book on New Guinea. It was a wet jungle, and disease was a problem. General MacArthur stated that out of 1,000 troops landing in New Guinea, over half of them would die from malaria. Well, that wasn't all, because 6 months into my service there, I got dengue fever, which is a jungle fever. And I was 18 years old. If I hadn't have been that young, I wouldn't have lived through it. But I had the blessing of sending me to Melbourne, Australia for R&R. And that's just like going to heaven, you know.
Right. let's talk about coming home and all of your brothers getting home too. I don't know if either one of you gentlemen know John Reinhold. He served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He did 3 tours of Iraq, and he works for the recruiting office here in town now. One of the things that he said on this show was that acclimating to life post-war was difficult for any veteran, no matter what war it was. You and your 3 brothers were all trying to do that at the same time. What was that like?
It was difficult. I did my basic in Oregon in a combat engineer outfit, and anybody knows that if you're in a combat engineer outfit, we were handling explosives, blowing bridges, and everything. But the big thing about serving in New Guinea was just the turmoil that the natives went through, because the Japanese just obliterated rape and all types of incest went on, and it was a blessing to wipe the Japanese out. Now, I was later assigned to Engineer of the Aviation Brigade, which we laid mesh wire for a runway for the P-38s to land on. And when those P-38s would land, water would shoot 12 feet in the air. But boy, we did a wonderful job fixing it so those P-38s could land.
You're talking about aircraft landing. You told a story before we came on the air about your brother landing some aircraft. Talk about that a little bit.
My middle brother flew a B-26 Marauder bomber, and he had made a mission to Germany, which was one of 60. And on the way back, they were flying over the channel to land in England, and they had taken on a lot of fire on their B-26. And in fact, they lost 2 of their people, 2 gunners, one in the tail gunner and one in the belly turner. And he said, got ready to pay off and land, and he said, all my cables were shot into. So he said, what am I going to do now? So he used his trim tab, the little crank in the ceiling, and he landed that B-26 with that trim tab.
And as I was telling you, I couldn't land an aircraft with all of the mechanics on it working. It's amazing to me that just using that little crank, he was able to do that.
Well, you know, it was either that or bite the dust, and he wanted to live. And
right.
He told of, before they'd get ready to go on a mission, that they had missed some of the pilots that had been shot down previously. And he said those meetings were horrible because they had missed those guys so much, you know.
Mr. Cotton, I'm going to turn it to you for just a few minutes here. At the chamber banquet last week, you took Mr. Davis around just to introduce him to everybody. How important is it to you that Mr. Davis's story gets told?
Oh, it's real important. See, my dad's a World War II veteran, and I think the world of all the veterans, but these World War II guys is, as Tom Brokaw said, the greatest generation. They really are. But and there's not, there's no World War I's left, but the World War II is getting that sandwich. But I really enjoyed taking him around. I told him it improved my image to have somebody like him with me out there. And I've told this story to several people. Really, I thought he was the hit of the Chamber of Commerce banquet.
I think so
People
too.
wanting to come up to him and, well, your wife, people
Yeah.
taking pictures with him and wanting to talk to him. And it was really, I'm really glad that I told someone, I wanted to introduce him, but the chamber exceeded my expectations with the standing ovation that they gave him. There was nearly I think there was 288 people there. They all stood up and gave him a standing ovation, and that exceeded my. And then the people that just wanted to talk to him and I say touch him and
Right.
yeah. I thought he was a hero. He was a hero to me, but he was really, it made the chamber banquet, I think, just that much better.
And we'll show the picture when I actually air this. But my wife did. She said she came to. She sat down beside me and she said, "Drew, I want a picture with Mr. Davis." I said, "Well, okay. Well, let's go ask him." She goes, "No, I can't ask him. I can't. You go ask him. You go ask him. I mean, you were a celebrity. No, you were a celebrity there, and that kind of goes back to when it kind of goes back to the reverence that we all have for veterans. As you look back now and you see the adulation. I've been in this business for 20 years, and I will always consider it one of my top honors getting to introduce you at the chamber banquet. Is What is that emotion for you when you see that kind of reverence and respect?
Well, I told Len, I said, I'm going to quit going places with you because I have to speak everywhere I go. But I was lying because I loved every minute of it. I love the people. I love everybody. But when I think about my brothers and I, and it was all about patriotism during that time because we were right in the middle of a depression. Nobody had anything to eat. And at least if you joined the Army, you got 3 squares a day and in uniform. And you had clothes to wear and a bed to sleep in until we got over there. But one of the greatest honors I think I had, and I think I wake up at night thinking about it, General MacArthur, when we landed in Manila and retook Manila, we were housed in a building that wasn't blown down right downtown Manila. Well, General MacArthur's general headquarters were right across the street. And I walked out one morning just checking the weather, and he was getting in a weapons carrier with 3 big Marines. And I thought, I'm going to salute the general, see what he did. And I saluted him, and he popped me the best salute you've ever seen. And I'll never forget that. He smiled, But to be that close to a man of history was really valuable to me.
A man of history. That's an interesting way of putting it, because in my mind, and Mr. Cotton, you tell me if you think that this is true too. For me, that's how I feel right now. Here's a man who not only served, his family's legacy was built on not only serving but surviving. Can you see yourself in that light?
I really can't. Only thing that we were wanting to do is get the war over with. And when we retook Manila and the bomb was dropped, that was it. And I knew I'd be coming home. And that was one of the worst trips, going over and coming back. It was 31 days on high seas. And going over, of course, you had Japanese submarines, and you weren't allowed to be on deck after dark, and especially smoking and lighting a cigarette because you could see that for miles. But I just, so many boys sick on the ship, because we were in the Coral Sea. It was a rough sea. But it took us 31 days from San Francisco, and that's another thing. As we came in under the Golden Gate Bridge, it was packed with flags and people, and all of them screaming, "Welcome back." And I really get torn up when I think about how the people loved us,
Mm. When you think about that, though, can you put into context the fact that it was reciprocated? In other words, they're just giving back to you even just a fraction of what it is that you were giving up for country? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, of course, we had heard they feed you real good because we hadn't had any beef in nearly 3 years, and we hadn't had any lettuce. And they gave us a half a head of lettuce and a pound of beef to eat in a tray that night. And boy, I mean, we were in high cotton because we hadn't had much to eat. I'll tell you, C rations and D rations was about all we had.
And let's go into that a little bit, Mr. Cotton. I've got a couple questions for you in just a moment, but for context, what are C rations and D rations for our younger viewers?
Well, the C ration is in a can, and the one I liked best was pork and beans. But the D ration was a candy bar, an old hard candy bar, and we gave all the kids in Manila, little children that were going through trash piles to get something to eat, we gave them everything we could to feed them, because those kids were starving to death, and they was going through trash piles getting something to eat. And that was the D ration, was the bar of candy. But those canned foods, most of them were pretty good.
You talk about the Depression as well in this book. Let's set some context for before the war. Um, you are how old when the Depression hits?
Well, I was born in 24,
Okay. So,
and the Depression,
so
of course,
5.
41,
Mm-hmm.
when it was dropped. But the big thing that I remember about the Depression was there wasn't any food. And they had a place kind of like where you can go today and get free food. And we were embarrassed, my older brother and I, to go down there and get grapefruit and whatever they'd give you. And mother said, I don't know what we're going to do, boys, but we're not going to put you through this anymore. And of course, Dad was gone then, and we didn't have him there. And it, uh, and the kids, like I mentioned before, that have read the book in the high schools all the way from Missouri to Little Rock, the big thing they're interested in my book is depression. What was a depression? In fact, I had a lady come to my house and had a little grandson. She said, he wants your book, but he wants to ask you, what is a depression? And I said, sit down. And I went through a depression. And he'd just sit there, little boy, and shake his hand because he couldn't see things being that bad for a small child.
Mm-hmm. My great grandfather was a World War II veteran.
Oh, was he?
He was, and he talked about he and Granny both talked about the Depression and what it was like, and even up until the time that they left us, they had Depression era kind of mindset. I mean, I remember as a kid walking into a closet that I didn't know was in the house. And it was a closet, I don't know, about half the size of this room. And it was just full of canned food, canned food, canned food. They canned everything. They grew everything. They did not like banks. They kept cash under the mattress. It really was, it wasn't just something that you lived through. It was something for them that they lived with.
That's right.
Is that true?
That's very true. Everything you said is right on the button.
How, let's go through that in context. How did it alter your mindset? Or did it? I mean, that's something you just grew up with.
Well, the thing of course, I was raised in Prescott, Arkansas, Nevada County. And of course, I graduated from high school and I played football and basketball.
Home of the Curly Wolves, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yes. In case anybody was wondering, that's the Prescott Curly Wolves. So there you go.
Wolves.
Yes.
Yeah. But when we'd walk to school, it was over a mile to school and back, and didn't have buses back then. But I knew some boys. As a boy, his dad owned a cleaning shop, and he had an A model. And boy, we got good with him. We wanted to ride all we could. And if you could get a double date, and ride in that A model, that was good stuff. But I think most of what I've said right there in that book.
I don't think people who are alive today, who are my age and younger, I'm 34, can grasp the gravity of what that time period was like. The closest that we have, and not to diminish anything, would have been 9/11 and the economic recession that followed a few years later. I don't really truly believe that there is anybody who is my age or younger who can appreciate what that time was like. Not from a historical perspective, but from a personal perspective. When you look back at that period, can you just kind of describe the emotion? Was it more just trying to survive?
It was strictly trying to survive. I remember my dad, he said, son, you're going to have to get you some clothes. School fishing start. So he went down to Western Auto and he told the guy, said, I want to buy my boy a push mower because they didn't have rotor mowers in. And he said, I'm going to pay $1 down, and it cost $10, and said he'll pay it out 50 cents a week. And that's where I started my work history. And I did buy enough, I had enough money to buy my clothes to go to school. We wore khakis back in those days mostly. But, I don't know, I really feel today we probably are on a mission. Of course, I'm upset about our government, but there's nothing I can do about that. But I think about our government back in those days and President Roosevelt and the way he cared so for our boys that were wounded and of course George W. Bush during that war.
Mm-hmm.
He'd meet an airplane and the wounded boys, he'd take them under his arm, hug them, and treat them right. But we didn't see much of that. Of course, I said I rode a ship to San Francisco and rode a troop train from San Francisco to Fort Chaffee and Fort Smith, and that's where we were released up there.
A troop train ride from San Francisco to Fort Chaffee. That could not have been a pleasant train ride.
Oh man, I'm telling you, you hardly had anything to eat. They had one chow deal, and they had to stop once in a while, and everybody go to that car, a few at a time. But I remember we came through Russell, going up there to Chaffee. But I don't know. I think about. I'm just glad I served my country.
Mr.
It was an honor, and I'm 90% disabled. I'm drawing pay from the government, and I can't complain about anything the way I've been treated.
That's interesting. I want to explore that just a minute. You just said, I can't complain. I'm going to go off on a tangent here, if you don't mind. There are so many folks out there now who seem to have become experts in that field of complaining. And here you are, someone who grew up a child of the Depression, who grew up in World War II, who then had to cope with that, come back from that, and rebuild from that. You mentioned, Mr. Cotton, Tom Brokaw's book, The Greatest Generation. It's my favorite book. It's on my desk at home. And one of the things that they talk about with The Greatest Generation is not just the fact that you grew up in the Depression, and not just the fact that you grew up fighting a war. It's the fact you had to come home and rebuild the country after that. And yet, through all of that, you say, I can't complain. Talk to my complainers out there.
Well, and I would have never gotten an education if I hadn't been on GI Bill. I came home, and I had two buddies that had just gotten out, and they were up here at Tech, it was Polytech, 2 years in. And I called one of them, and I said, where is Russ? And he told me basically where it was, and he said, boy, you got to come up here. He said, they got lakes, they got trees, they got mountains. He said, you got to come up here. So the next day, I caught a bus, and the highway up through coming out Dardanelle was all gravel back then. And I caught a bus, and they let me out. There used to be a bus station right across from law office there. Right, and all I had was a pasteboard box. My mama had raked up some old one pillow, and you couldn't buy a uniform. I mean, you couldn't buy clothes. Everything went to uniforms back in those days. So I wore my GI uniform. It was in fall of the year. And actually, the semester had already started. And but I walked all the way from that bus station out to Tech, and I went to, and I had my two buddies, I stayed with them one night, and I checked in, and I graduated from the last 2-year college and the first 4-year college.
Mr. Cotton, I'm sitting here and I'm watching you hear this story, and you can tell that it still affects you too. As a child of a World War II veteran, this seems all too familiar to you, doesn't it?
It does. Something he didn't mention, that if I'm not mistaken, your father was in World War I. You've had somebody in your family in every war.
That's right.
Up through to May.
That's
now
right.
that's you won't find that many places. My father was a World War II veteran. Of course, I'm a Vietnam veteran. My son was Iraq and Afghanistan, but he went all the way, everyone, all the way through you. That's pretty unique.
And I see on your cap World War II and Korea. Is that correct?
Right.
So you were in the Korean War as well?
I went to the military district headquarters. That's where I reported. I'd gotten a job, just graduated from Tech, teaching school up at Altus. And I thought, boy, this is something. And my wife had a job. So I made the mistake of joining a reserve outfit. Well, they were called active duty. So I got called for a final type physical. And I reported to military district headquarters in Little Rock. And there's an old colonel there with a big mustache. And he said, son, you got a college degree, hadn't you? And I said, yes, I have. He says, can you type? I said, well, I'm state champion. I can type 105 words a minute. He said, how'd you like to stay right here in Little Rock? Well, I said, thank you, Lord. So I didn't go overseas, but I served all during the Korean War in Little Rock. But I did a lot of assists for the veterans that were coming back. And there's nothing that I wouldn't do for a veteran.
Right.
I don't care what war he fought in.
Mr. Cotton, let's go to you now for a minute. You served in Vietnam. Where were you in Vietnam?
I was what they call up in the Central Highlands, up in the northern part, and I was with the 4th Infantry Division. I was with an infantry unit. As I told Mr. Davis coming over here, I wound up being what they call a point man for an infantry unit. That's the first man through. And I was telling him a story that I told one of my friends who's an Army Ranger from Pottsville about it. I said I'd been over just for a short period of time. I got elevated or promoted to point man, and he was a Ranger. He said, I don't think I'd consider that a promotion. But that's what I did, yeah. And I was over there for a year. And I was fortunate that I spent several months in the jungles. Once you get in over there, you don't, where I was, you went in, you never really came out. But I was fortunate that I was able to, because of my education, they brought me out and I was able to come back and be in a support, what we call in the rear area. So I spent a few months in the rear area. So I saw both sides, the combat side, and I saw the support side too.
How long was your military career, Mr. Cotton?
It was just a little less than 2 years. I volunteered, but it was a 2-year commitment. But when I came home, if you had less than 6 months, they didn't want to fool with you, so they let you out. And I had like 3 months left, I believe. And so I came back and went back to school. And like you, I went back to school on the GI Bill, working on my master's like you are now.
Right, doing the best that we can here.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk for both of you. Life after war. And Mr. Davis, I'll go to you to start. You talk about you're teaching school and your sentence there. Boy, this is something that stuck with me. Like, hey, I've got it made here. How did your experience overseas impact the way that you raised your family?
Well, it didn't impact it really. Like I said, in our family, I got 3 grandsons. 2 of them graduated from Auburn and 1 from Alabama. The 2 from Auburn flew Apaches in Iraq and are all decorated greatly. And one of them just retired as a lieutenant colonel. Their dad served in Desert Storm. And that's where Len was talking about somebody in my family has served somewhere in every war since. The thing that I'm concerned about the guys that served where they did, Len and all the boys, is this, what's that stuff they sprayed? Agent Orange.
Agent Orange.
And that concerned me that those boys had to go through that.
Mr. Cotton, you came home. You work on your master's. Your time, how did it impact your family?
When I came home, unlike Mr. Davis and unlike my son, I came home by myself. There wasn't anybody. I didn't come home with a unit. You came home with a unit. My son came home from Iraq with his unit at the same time too. When I came home, after about a day, it was kind of surreal. I thought, did I really go? Was I really over there? And when I changed to civilian clothes, and I bet it wasn't 10 days, I was back up to the University of Arkansas working on my master's. And my professor up there, he said, I've been out of school I've been out from my bachelor's 3 years all total. And I taught school too, my first year out of school and a couple of years in the military. My professor said, we want to get you back in the study, back in the habit of studying. and he said, we're going to put you in a 6-week course of biochemistry. And that's all I did for 6 weeks. I sweat through that thing thinking, how am I ever going to get through this? So I just really changed immediately back to kind of being a college student real quick. But other than that, it was, I didn't have any ill effects of any kind, no.
Let's talk about the generations after. You were just talking about every generation since has served in a war. I think most people have been able to track the generations come after you and your family, Mr. Cotton. When you look at your legacy, and you're looking at the fact that you have decorated grandsons and sons who served in the military. Your son is very, very likely going to be his party's nominee for president of the United States at some point. How do you take that in? How do you process that?
Well, it's just another thing of pride and love for your loved ones that have served. Because actually those boys went to war because their dad was in war. And of course their grandfather from the other side was in World War II also. So all they've known is Army and everything that went on with it. And they'll never forget it, those boys won't. They talk to me all the time. They ask me about what'd you do at this and that and so forth. And I tell them, and they say, boy, that's outdated. I said, it sure is. World War II is outdated compared to the fireworks we've got today.
What about your legacy, Mr. Cotton? You look at the generations that have come after you, and now, I mean, you see the success of the senator and where your family legacy is going. I mean, just can you put it into words?
Well, one thing I want to say is when we came home, I'm not for sure that the veterans were as well respected from Vietnam.
That's right.
I never saw the things that they talk about, but now I'll say one thing, it's different now, because people do thank you for your service. The first time I was ever thanked for my service, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was standing up there by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. There's a picture of three ghosts. It's a statue of three men, and they look just like we did in Vietnam. And I was sitting there looking at that guy, and this guy comes up to me and said something, and I told him he said, welcome home. I'd never heard that before. That was years after that thing. Yeah. But now the veterans of all that, and they're making up for it now. Mm-hmm. And people thank you for your service all the time. Just like the other night, they thanked him, and it makes me feel good. At the time, I didn't really think that much about it. I came home by myself. I didn't think that much about it, but looking back, I wish that they'd been treated a little bit differently, because people were looking at the soldier like it was their fault. It wasn't the soldier's fault. No. We went over and served our country because we were asked to. And in my case, I volunteered, and I was proud of my service. I really was. But I was asked to do that for my country. But a lot of people didn't look at it that way. But now, I think that they do, and they looked back at the mistake that they made back then.
Yeah, and it's important to note the historical context of that for our younger viewers who are not who may not necessarily know this barrage of thanking veterans for their service now, and really that groundswell of patriotism. We didn't really see that groundswell until post 9/11. Really, I don't think, because when Vietnam veterans came home, some of them were spat upon, some of them were called names. They were treated horribly. It was not the same kind of scenario as it was for you coming home and the flags and such coming home. It was, well, now you're back. I hope you can make it. But
when my son came back from Iraq, it was so enjoyable. My wife and I went down to, I think it was Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I believe where it was, and we waited out on the airfield, and it was nice. We saw two planes, and they would tell you, there were several of the families, you'd see the two planes coming off in the distance, and they circled the field twice. They landed, the guys get off with their backpacks and their rifle. It looked like they just came out of the field out there. Went inside, the band was playing. I thought, now that's the way you welcome home people.
Absolutely.
It really was nice. And I thought back upon my time, I thought that people didn't have, they just didn't do that back then. It just didn't, that I ever saw. But like I say, again, I came home by myself. I didn't come home with a unit.
When my brother came home, it wasn't quite the pomp and circumstance you were talking about. Everybody was very grateful, but We came in a little bit early. We went to Mississippi to get him. He was in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2007 and 2008. And when he got home, we went to Mississippi to go and get him. They had fallen out of formation and had boys, you're ready to rock and roll. You're ready to go home. Well, my brother was not going to sit around and just wait on us to come up to the barracks to get him. He took off walking. We met him about a mile outside of the base because he was not going to stick around. And he hops in the truck and we took him home. But it wasn't quite the pomp and
If I'm not
circumstance.
mistaken, I think I wrote your brother a letter.
You did, sir. He still has it.
I think so. 'Cause I remember when they went in. I remember y'all met several years back. Yeah.
Yeah, you did write my brother a letter, and he still has it, and it was one of the prized possessions of that era for us.
Yeah. Well, I know we know what veterans go through, and we know that they appreciate a letter. And some of them I've even could send an email. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm just amazed by when I was in the field over there in the jungles, I would write a letter to my wife or my dad and my mother. And a helicopter would come in and bring us a resupply of food, and you'd give it to the door gunner and say, when you go back, can you send it off? It was a 3-week turnaround by the time I'd send that letter, and they'd got back home, and they'd write me a letter, and it'd come back, and they'd bring it back to me out in the field. It took 3 weeks. When my son was over, well, in Afghanistan especially, he was with a reconstruction team, not an infantry unit then. We could send a message on a computer. I could send something to him, and he would answer me back. And I think, boy, have times changed? Just immediately you find out. Yeah.
And just a few years later than that, I mean, your son Tom was in 2003. Was that right? Was it when he was over there?
I don't remember the year that he went in. He was, it'd be roughly maybe 18, 19 years ago. Something like that.
Yeah, the invasion began in 2003, I believe.
Okay.
And my brother was 5 years after that.
Okay.
But even just 5 years after that, my brother would call me on the phone at work 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
It got to a point where I had to tell him, I was like, hey, you can't call during this. I got to go to work, man. And my granddad would tell stories about how he wouldn't hear from my Granny Jean for a month and a half when they were deployed, just because. How long did it take?
31 days to get a letter or send something back.
31 days.
My mother was the best at making fruitcakes at Christmas time. She put a lot of rum in it. So in New Guinea, this can came for me out in the jungle. And I said, boy, Mama didn't forget me. And I opened that thing, and I nearly got drunk just smelling it. But all the GIs had to come in and get a piece of it.
Sure.
But I was going to mention my book. Over on the back, I tell about honor flights for the World War II veterans that Tyson and Walmart spent $50,000 a flight for us to go and view the memorial up there. And we were treated royally, and Bob Dole back then met every flight, and he was sitting there signing books and doing everything. But that was a wonderful time. And when we landed, that place was packed with people slapping us on the back, thanking us for our service. I couldn't believe it. And when we landed, they showered us the plane, because that's supposed to be for dignitaries. Mm-hmm. And they showered our plane when we landed, and the pilot told us that's what it's for. But then when we boarded the plane to come home, there was a gal sitting there, kissed every one of us on the cheek, and she had some lipstick she had put on there. And my wife said, you won't shave for a week. I said, more a month.
Or a month. My brother tells a story, and Mr. Reinhold tells a similar story of being thanked for their service when they got home and almost being a little uncomfortable with it. My brother even says, I'm not a hero. I did what my country asked me to do. Is that how the two of you view it now as well?
I feel the same way. I appreciate people recognizing me as a World War II veteran, but the big thing is they recognize that I gave an awful important part of my life to my country. And I'm not sorry a bit I served. I'd do it again.
Is that a similar?
Exactly. And I never get tired. I don't ever get tired of someone thanking me for my service at all.
That's right.
Not at all. I was over here at Russville the other day getting some feed, and I have one of my old trucks, and I've got on the back. I've got a license plate that veterans get license plates, and said Vietnam veteran. And the guy loading my feed thanked me. He said, "I want to thank you for your service." And I got to think, well, how did you know? And I dawned on me my license plate back there. I never get tired of hearing it all. No, not at all.
I want to make sure that everybody sees this again. The title of the book is The Brothers Four, Reliving the Great Depression in World War II. You can see it right here. You can get a copy. You can't have this copy because Mr. Davis has graciously gifted me this one, and this is a prized possession. So you can't have this one, but you can go to Amazon and get this book now. I highly, highly recommend that you do so. We cannot lose these pieces of history. And I know that you have another engagement. I could sit here and talk with you all day, but I guess this just means we're going to have to do this again, gentlemen.
Oh, I'd love it. You would too.
I would. Sure.
I've enjoyed it.
Anytime.
I really.
All right.
I think it's an honor. Of course, you did a great job over there, but this today is a wonderful thing in my life.
The reason he does a great job, he's a professional. He does the radio for the Dardanelle Sand Lizards
you
also,
told
and
me about
it does a very good job.
Well, I appreciate
They've got a
that.
good crew.
We do now, and I'll tell you a funny story, and then we'll wrap this whole thing up. When I was in Boys State with Mr. Cotton here, and one of the dreams that I had was I wanted to be in broadcasting. And I went all over. I worked for ESPN, and I worked for NBC and all of these places and Channel 7. The one job I wanted more than anything, and I've been on national television, sir. The one job I wanted was to be the play-by-play guy for the Dardanelle Sand Lizards, and when Kent Talent called me, I could have quit everything else I was doing. That was it. That was the dream gig. So to hear Mr. Cotton say that.
Well, you're good at it. I mean, you're a professional. And like I say, he talked at Rotary one time, and he said, every so many seconds, I'll tell you the score. Because sometimes we don't know the score, and I followed you, and you sure do. But y'all do a great job.
We have a timer. Because sometimes on social media the comments are, well, we didn't know the score for 2 minutes, Drew. Come on now. I mean, and you'll get text messages telling me, hey, you need to make sure that you mention Miss Wilma's birthday today, or you need to do this or that thing or whatever else. So we made sure to get all those in. Yeah. It's more than just football for the folks over at Dardanelle. I can promise you that.
Sure.
All right.
A lot of fun though, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. I hope I got 30 years in me like Kent and Mark did. I love it.
Somebody asked me one time, I said if I could pick anywhere, because I do the field announcing, I said if anywhere on a Friday night, if you said you can be anywhere in the world on Friday night, I said put me in that press box up there with all my friends up there, and always a good meal. It's the highlight of my week. I look forward to it every year.
There's something about it that you just can't beat, and it's an honor to be a part of it. Well, there's the Thunder, and you got another engagement. So, folks, that's going to
sign my book there for you.
Sure, absolutely. Let me wrap this show up for us. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Drew Brent. That's Jock Davis, Mr. Len Cotton. If you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today, 479-968-5668. The book is called The Brothers Four. It's on Amazon now, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.